Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Sarah Avery, and I am the Executive Director of Quanta Change. And thank you so much for joining me today. So, over the past few weeks, I've been talking about how to get unstuck. There are different ways that people feel stuck, different reasons that people feel stuck. So if what I'm talking about today doesn't resonate for you, go back to the last couple live videos I've done about getting unstuck and see if maybe one of those forms of feeling stuck and what you can do about it resonates more for you. So today, to get into the subject today, I want to ask you a few questions. Do you ever just feel like you just can't? Like you just can't do it. You can't get yourself up off the couch. You can't get yourself motivated. It just feels like too much. Maybe it feels like you're trying to move forward and someone's grabbing the back of your shirt and dragging you backwards. Sometimes it feels like that. Maybe it just feels like you would say you just don't have the will to do what you need to do. I've heard that all a lot over the past 22 years. I've felt it myself. And so if you can relate to any of this, you're in very good company. And I've helped lots of people with this exact issue. So I'm wondering if you've tried to address it. First, if you have this pattern, if this resonates for you, you probably have pushed through it a bazillion times. Maybe you feel like you're pushing against this and through it all the time, maybe even to do the smallest things in your world, and the biggest ones too. So that constant pushing is absolutely, I think if you have this pattern, necessary for just kind of moving forward in life, unfortunately. But have you also worked to try and get things to feel easier? Maybe you've done therapy or some kind of self-help to see if you can break this pattern. Has it worked? Has it helped? Is it feeling like things are flowing more easily? Is it feeling like you're more easily motivated? If so, that's fantastic. It is great to find what works for you and stick with it as long as it works for you. So if you found something that works, that's fantastic. If it hasn't worked, you're not alone. And I want you to know it is not your fault. And big pet peeve here, I want you to know it's not because you're lazy. And in fact, if you've been pushing against this or through this pattern for everything from the biggest to the smallest thing in your life for years, decades, you are the opposite of lazy. You are pushing against a really hard force that's pulling you backward and moving forward instead. So you're definitely not lazy if people have accused you of that. So like I said, you're in good company. I felt this myself. Lots and lots of clients of mine have over the past 22 years. And so if the method that you've been trying to try and break or change this pattern have not worked, what I want you to know is it's because those methods have not been able to get rid of the learned distress that's been pulling you backward, that backward pulling force. So learned distress is the feeling, this is a Quanta Change term, from the work that I do, a term for the feeling that you absorbed very early in life, that there's something wrong with you being just the way that you are. And as you are absorbing this feeling that there's something wrong with you from how the people around you felt about being themselves, not what they said or what they did, but just absorb this from how people around you felt about being themselves, your brain was also developing a survival mechanism to allow you to manage, cope with, control, deal with this awful feeling that there's something wrong with you, as well as to give you some way to just get up in the morning and keep moving forward. So that survival mechanism also allowed you to fit really well, kind of like a puzzle piece, with your parents or other early caregivers, older siblings, fit well in your family. So that survival mechanism and learned distress were put into place by the time you were 2.5 years old. That's when your rational brain starts to develop. So this is all coming into being before you had any choice in the matter, before you had any way of evaluating, is this the best possible survival mechanism for me? You didn't have any choice. You just absorbed it. And so there are 6 basic patterns of learned distress plus survival mechanism together. And at the end of this video, I'm going to tell you what they are and how you can find out for free which one of these patterns you have. But right now, what I want to say is that some of these patterns have a component to them that is exactly what I've been talking about today. This feeling that you just can't do it, you don't have the will, that you're being dragged backwards when you're trying to move forwards. That makes achievement, makes other things in your life, makes achieving your goals, wherever that is in your life, really hard. Now, for some people, they have that across the board in all parts of life. Some people just have it in one part of life. So maybe you feel that way about achieving goals, but then in terms of relationships, you feel like, no, I can put lots of effort, and it doesn't feel like effort, into making sure my relationships are good. And that works totally differently for me from how achievement works. Or maybe you're exactly the opposite. Achievement's really easy, but relationships are really hard. So whether you have this across the board or in just one part of your life, here are a couple of facets of that, I guess. So one is just what I've been describing today, this feeling of not having the will to do what you need to do, what's good for you, the feeling of like being dragged backwards when you're trying to move forward, that feeling. And, I want to acknowledge here that it's totally a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you don't do something, it won't get done. So a big one for me in this realm is getting my backyard weeded. And I just look at those weeds. I can look at those weeds all day and think, oh, I just can't. And I guarantee you, the number of days that I do that are the number of days in which those weeds will continue to grow taller and taller and get to be worse of a problem, right? If you don't do it, it's not going to get done. But so that is very true. So if you have this experience that's just really hard to get stuff done, and sometimes as a result of that, you don't get stuff done, then you don't get stuff done, right? But there's a bigger piece of this that I want you to know, because that kind of gets into, being called lazy or something, right? But here's the bigger piece of it. So there are other survival mechanisms with learned distress in which people feel like, I just kind of do the right things generally, and things work out for me. And that's their experience of life. They just kind of do things, sometimes kind of half-heartedly, and still things work out for them. And I know if you're listening to me today and you're resonating with this, you're feeling like, oh, I wish I do things more meticulously than anyone else, and I still don't get results, right? So there's this real contrast when it comes to these two different kinds of survival mechanisms, where if I were to put someone with this pattern where you feel dragged back, you don't have the will, right next to the person who has the pattern where they say, well, generally I do the right things and things work out, and that's how things work for them. I give you the same task, I give you the same resources, I give you the same intelligence level, I give you the same time, all of those things, everything's equal. And every single time, the person with this feeling that I'm talking about today, this pattern, they will do things more meticulously, more perfectly, they will put more effort, more juice, more heart into the whole thing, and they will get no results or almost no results. The person who just goes, here we go, I'll just do it, and it'll be fine, they will get beautiful results. They will sail right through and get wonderful results. And the person with the pattern I'm talking about today will get like 0 results. That's how these patterns work, because learned distress and its survival mechanism are actually the automatic generating force behind all of the situations and conditions and relationships and everything and how it works in your life. And so when the survival mechanism says work as hard as you can and get no results, that's the survival mechanism, as awful as that is. then that's your experience over and over and over again. And if this is you, I know you're nodding your head yes, because you're like, oh my gosh, somebody finally hears me. I've been saying this for years. I've been working as harder than anybody else for years and getting nothing out of it. And I'm so sick of it. So if this is you, totally hear you on that. And it's not your fault. It's because your learned distress and your survival mechanism are generating that pattern for you. So the next question is, so why is it that you can't, maybe somebody said, just snap out of it, just work a little harder, just do something more, just have a positive attitude. Why are you so negative all the time? Well, you're so negative all the time because nothing's working when you work harder than anyone else, right? If you are negative. But, why is it that you can't snap out of it like that? Well, it's because of something that Quanta Change calls the rational brain roadblock. So this is the phenomenon by which when your rational brain is operating, there is a wall of resistance to change or protection around your sense of self. Your sense of self stores your learned distress and your survival mechanism. It stores all of how you feel about being yourself. And so when this rational brain roadblock is up and activated, you cannot think your way out of your learned distress and your survival mechanism. You just can't do it. And maybe you're nodding your head yes again, because you're thinking, I have tried to think my way out of this. I have tried to have a more positive attitude. I've tried to change my thinking and it hasn't worked. That is because of the rational brain roadblock. But Quanta Change was actually developed to get through the rational brain roadblock and get to your brain while your sense of self is actually open to change. So the way that Quanta Change does that is it works with your brain during sleep. And the reason for sleep there are two reasons for sleep. So one is because this is when your rational brain is entirely shut down. And when the rational brain is shut down, that wall of resistance to change or protection around your sense of self gets deactivated. And so we can get to your brain, the part of you that stores how you feel about being yourself, while that rational brain roadblock is deactivated. The second reason for working with your brain during sleep is because that's when that's when your sense of self is actually getting recharged. So what Quanta Change allows you to do is to tell your brain during sleep that you want to recharge not anymore with your learned distress, recharging with that feeling that there's something wrong with you, that feeling that nothing can ever work. What you want to recharge with is your core well-being. This is the feeling at your center that you are just great being yourself, that things can work well for you, that you have everything you need, that you are well and safe and good, and that you matter, and that things can work for you. So as you recharge at night with well-being, your brain has to peel off layers of learned distress, and they're peeled off permanently to allow your well-being, as it's recharging your sense of self, to expand and take the place that learned distress was sitting. And so as you can imagine, you feel better, things in your life start working better. And when I think about this pattern that I'm talking about today, here are some ways that people experience that change. So one thing that happens is you maybe wake up one day and think, oh, that thing that's been sitting there waiting to get done for, I don't know, a month, 5 years, 2 decades. Oh, you know what? I can just do that. It's totally different. You just feel one day, instead of feeling dragged back like I could never do that, that's too much, you just feel like, well, if it were me, I might feel like, hey, I could just go out there and pull a few weeds today. And then before I know it, half the yard is weeded. It can be like that. It can feel like those ways in which you have felt you have to be more perfect all the time at doing things, more meticulous. You have to always just be better and more perfect at doing things. That voice starts to quiet down. You start to feel less and less that way, and more just like you can just do things. You can just pick up and do things. I might feel like I don't have to get the whole yard weeded. I can just go out there and pick a few weeds out, and wow, look at that. It's better. It doesn't all have to get done. It doesn't have to be perfect. You might find that things are working differently than they ever have before for you. You might feel that things are flowing more easily for you. I don't have an example with the weeds yet on this one, but when this happens, and I'll give you an example of that today from one of my clients, it might seem just kind of miraculous. Like, how did this happen? This is not how things have ever worked for me, and this is amazing. And the last thing I'll say about this in sort of general terms is that sometimes you just find a new pathway forward for something. With my weeds, honestly, what I've done is I found somebody to hire to come do my weeds for me, and it's miraculous. Their crew comes, and I look out before they come, and it's a jungle, and I look out after they came, and it's like Better Homes and Gardens. It's so beautiful and done, and it's done. And that was something that I never even thought of doing. It felt like I had to do it myself, and there was no other pathway. I've seen that in lots of different ways. It's just one of the ways that can look. But let me give you some examples from my clientele over the years of how this has looked. So the first one, he was a college student. He had always had the experience with school that it was really, really hard for him. No matter what he did, it didn't work well. He would study really hard for a test, and he would know everything. And then he would get such test anxiety from this experience of nothing working that he would walk into the test, and it was like somebody took an eraser and just erased his brain from all his studying, and he wouldn't remember anything he studied. And I wonder if you have this experience, if this rings a bell for you, if it feels like there's something in your life like that, where it just feels like your brain steps in and just like knocks all the blocks down and says, nope, this is not going to happen. So that's what school had been like for him. And in fact, when we started working together, he had just failed out of a semester of college. His parents said, you're coming home and you're doing summer school here at home. We're not going to keep paying for this expensive college for you to just fail out of it. So he was in a pretty rough spot. And he was taking summer school. He was actually taking the same course he just failed out of in a condensed summer school form. And so he was getting ready for his first test, and he was studying, and we were working. He was unlearning the learn to stress that was sitting back behind all of this, this trouble and struggle for him. And he studied, and he went into the first test, and he said he looked down and he starts reading through the questions, and he says, oh my gosh, I'm going to ace this test. I know all this stuff. He said, I was pretty nervous walking into it, but it was nothing like anything I'd ever experienced before. I knew this stuff, and he did ace that test. You know what happened? A few months later, at the end of the first semester, the fall semester, he made the dean's list. This is a kid who struggled with school, and he made the dean's list. He said, if you'd told me that was going to happen, I would have laughed at you. There was no way I could have believed that was even possible. So that's one example. Another example is actually from my very first client. And so we were working on putting everything in order in her life. Everything was out of order. She was dyslexic. She never made it to work on time, and she had what she described as extreme clutter. You know, she was one of those people where like this nothing ever works was kind of an across the board experience for her. And she called me and said something that I've heard so many times from clients over the years, which is, nothing happened, Sarah. Nothing happened since we last talked. Now, because she was my very first client, I was a little concerned when she said this. So I was kind of stalling for time. I said, well, start telling me about your week. I was thinking, maybe this doesn't work. So she starts telling me about her week. The first thing she says is, well, I only got one part of my house cleaned out. And I said, wait, how many years has it been since you cleaned out a whole part of your house like that? And she said, oh, I actually can't remember. Many years. I really can't remember the last time I did this. I said, okay. And she said, oh, well, you know, I did make it to work on time every day since we talked. And I said, really? And she said, oh, wait, no. Except for the day I got there an hour early and organized the office before everybody else came in. Now, by this time, we were both kind of laughing because it was sort of ridiculous that she'd said nothing happened. Because she said if she'd put these things on a list, she'd been trying to make this list for years, right? Get to work on time, get part of my house cleaned out, put stuff in order, all of those things. She'd been putting that stuff on lists for years and not been able to do any of it. And so she said if we'd made this list, she wouldn't have been able to do it. People call me and say nothing happened for this reason. So, because it happens all the time. So, when learned distress is in the driver's seat, it's the generating force. It's what's generating everything that's going on for you, no matter how things work out for you in the end. Learned distress really is the driving force. And so, in order to deal with that, you have to put a lot of energy into squelching the learned distress, controlling it, managing it, sweeping it out of the way, leaping over it, slogging through it, like however you deal with the learned distress, you have to put a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy, even if it's buried. It takes a lot of energy to keep it buried. And then on top of that, you sort of have to lean out over nothing and make something happen. And so we are used to noticing the good things that have happened because we have made them happen. We have put all of that energy into controlling our learned distress and then making something happen on top of that. It takes a lot of energy, right? It's kind of exhausting to think about. When well-being is in the driver's seat, which is what Quanta Change brings about, is putting well-being in the driver's seat. Those good things happen easily. And because they happen so easily, we don't notice them because we did not put that Herculean effort into trying to make them happen. So, truly, I've seen this happen for myself. I've seen this happen for so many of my clients, even ones where across the board they feel this way in their life. So if this sounds like you, what I want to say is that change really is possible. I have seen it so many times. So if this sounds interesting, intriguing to you, you want to find out more, the first thing to do is to find out which pattern of learned distress and survival mechanism you have. You can find out for free. There are 6 of these patterns. Like I said earlier, they are the idealist, the perfectionist, the optimist, caregiver, defeatist, and the dictator. Sometimes that one's called benevolent dictator. And so the reason to find out which one of these patterns you have is not to just dive into it more, understand the problem better, analyze, figure out a better coping mechanism to deal with it. No, it's none of those things. It's to find out what you're going to be getting rid of through the Quanta Change process. So to do that, to find out which pattern of learned distress you have that you can get rid of so that you can experience your well-being, you're going to go to my website and take a free, in-depth, scientifically validated personality test. This measures your learned distress, and I'm going to graph it and send you this free report with your pattern of learned distress, the way you've been surviving with it, and what Quanta Change typically looks like for someone with your pattern of learned distress. So in order to do that, you go to my website, Quanta Change, Quanta change.com, and click on the free report button and fill out the test, and I will graph your answers and send it back to you. So I hope that this has been helpful at the very least in validating your experience today. If this is you, if this pattern is you, and you've felt stuck for a long time with this pattern, I want you to know you're not alone and it really can change. So thank you so much for joining me today. And I hope you will join me again next week to hear another way in which Quanta Change really can help you feel good being you. Thanks so much.